Got a bit of an invitation for you. Why don't you find some time to dig out your fishnet stockings? Don't start looking at me in a funny way. It is hard to believe. I'm talking about something, quite relevant here, I promise you. It has been 40 years since we first heard this song.
It's just a jump to the left. With your hands on your hips.
I so wish you had a little peephole into the studio here, or we had a camera on or something, because you had to see this to believe it. I've got Ridian in the studio here with me, standing there doing the time warp, and I have to say, Rid, nobody moves like you do. That was quite some moving going on there.
I can't get enough of it.
It's muscle memory now, I guess. It's all sort of ingrained in all those sinews and synapses.
Yeah, dancing isn't my forte, but I think the time warp's universal. Everybody can do it. It's straightforward. And it's thoroughly enjoyable, and we do it at the end of every night, Rocky Horror.
Yeah, so it's one of those ones you're probably doing in your sleep by now, aren't you?
Pretty much, yeah, although I've had a few months off the show. I started the show in Brighton, and they've been touring around the whole of the UK. And then I left the show, and then they invited me back to Cardiff. Being a Welshman, I couldn't say no.
Absolutely, that's an invitation you can't resist. Let's set the scene. It's celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, the Rocky Horror Show, with this UK tour. Started in the New Theatre last night in Cardiff, is that right?
It did, yeah.
Yeah, and we've got... You're obviously headlining the cast. We've also got Sam Atwater and Danny Harmer involved. You're playing what role?
I play Rocky Horror.
You play Rocky Horror himself.
Yeah,
I mean, where does that sit on the CV in terms of the all-time great roles?
Well, it's certainly up there. It's a fantastic role. I mean, the lead role, however, is Oliver Thornton. He plays Frankenfurter.
Right.
And I'm his creation. And Oliver's a Welshman as well. And you mentioned Danny Harmer. She's a new addition to the cast. It's the first time for me to work with her. She plays Janet. A lot of you remember Danny from Strictly Come Dancing.
And Tracy Beaker.
Absolutely.
She was Tracy Beaker as well.
But of course, on Strictly, she had the best drive, didn't she? Do you remember that drive?
She was incredible the way she moved, wasn't she?
Yeah.
She was partnered with Vincent Simone, wasn't she?
I believe
they were
so.
Two little ducks together, but boy, they could rock it.
So we rehearsed for the first time yesterday, and she was a delight to work with.
Yeah, I can imagine. Because coming together as an ensemble like that, I mean, it's such an iconic show. So many different people have played it over the years. I mean, Russell Crowe's been involved. I mean, some really big names. You must feel a sense of responsibility of what you're actually going to do with that show, because it is so beloved by so many people all over the world.
You're right, yeah. It was intimidating when we first kicked off the tour, because as you know, the fans of the show know it inside out. But it was great to work with Chris Luscombe, who works closely with Richard O'Brien. Chris directed the last tour. And yeah, I think what you find is the audience, they come with you, and they're there for a good time. And of course, it's a unique show because they shout back at you, and they're as much as part of the show as we are the actors, and it's fun. I've said it before, but we feel kind of let down if we don't get heckled. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it is one of those shows. I mean, we're all about interactivity these days, but it was the first really great interactive show, wasn't it? I mean, it was ahead of its time.
Oh, absolutely, in so many more ways than one.
Yeah.
That, and of course, it was very risque. Our show is, you still get the Rocky Horror elements, but it's not completely crude. Do you know what I mean? It's fun.
We'll talk about one of the risque elements in just a second. But for those who, I mean, it's got fans all around the world, as you say, millions of fans, Ridian. But for those who don't actually know the plot of the Rocky Horror Show over the last sort of 4 decades, just give us a brief synopsis of what actually happens in the show.
Well, it's kind of a spoof on Frankenstein. And that's where we get the character Frankenfurter. So these two straight-laced American couple, they just come from a wedding, and they want to drop in on a friend of theirs, and their car breaks down, and they find a castle. They enter the castle.
As you do.
And as you do. And they go into the world of Frankenfurter, Rocky Horror. And Frankenfurter, he's creating this perfect human being. Don't know how I got the job, but that's me, Rocky Horror, and I'm born. And then what happens is a whole load of, let's see, there's quite a lot of sexiness in it, you know, and yeah, it's the best thing to do is come and watch, and then you'll really know the plot.
And get hooked. I have no doubts about that at all. You say about a little bit of riskiness and a little bit of sexiness and everything. Probably just as well, his creation, which is you, Rocky Horror, that, you know, you're looking pretty ripped at the moment, I have to say. And it's probably just as well, bearing in mind the costume you're wearing throughout most of the show.
Yes, well, I only wear leopard print pants and gold boots, which wasn't great, you know, in Stoke in the winter, but it's not so bad when the temperature's like this. Yeah, but keeping in shape is the hardest thing about my role. It's not a huge role, but having to train and keep the body up is quite tough. And yes, he's supposed to have blonde hair and a tan, so we go into a fair few tanning booths.
Yeah, well, I have to say, you're looking pretty healthy at the moment. I'll describe Prudien to you. He's sitting in front of me. He's basically glowing. He's got this California tan, this shock of blonde hair. You look like you should be on a surfboard, dude, somewhere.
Well, yeah, maybe so. Yeah, but I wear a wig, actually. It's funny, because although I got blonde hair, they put me in a wig, which we nearly didn't put on last night. I've got a new wig mistress, and I don't know where she was, so I was really late for my appearance, but we made it in time.
You know, one of my producers, Paul, went to see it. He said it was absolutely a cracking show. And we've had a message in for you from Carol Morgan, saying, would you kindly pass this message on to Friedan? Thanks for a brilliant tour, a fantastic last show in Brecon last Saturday. Good luck for the rest of Rocky. Can't wait to see it on Friday. She's going to see it on Friday. Love you loads, Carol, a.k.a. Moggy. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, Moggy. Yes. Thank you, Carol.
There you go, Carol. We've passed the message on, and he's very grateful on that. Do you feel it's a bit of a departure for you, though, in terms of doing this? Because you're known for your sort of your classical voice and that sort of classical, sort of beautiful singing, that sense of the pureness of it all. I mean, this is going completely away from all that you sort of became well known for, really, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. I like to remain versatile, and theatre is a big part of my life. I studied classically, but then I had a place at the Royal Academy to study musical theatre. And it's always been my passion. I see it as a way of just combining all elements, because I've just done my Welsh tour, which is my solo tour, and I have time off to do that, and then I can do the theatre as well, and then make albums, which I'll be doing. We'll be recording an album in August, September, release it early next year. But I love it all. I like to keep it varied. I think that's what the audience like as well. If you can do it, well, why not? And when I was on that show 6 years ago, X Factor, all of my performances were varied. I think if you do the same thing all of the time, people soon get bored.
And you need to stay fresh as an artist, I guess, don't you? Because it doesn't matter how professional you are. If you're doing something again and again and again, the same thing, not only, I guess, do you fight the typecasting, but it's also that element of, well, I don't want to get bored with this either.
Well, sure. And the great thing about theatre is the older I get, the more roles become available, hopefully, you know? And it's fun. And the great thing about theatre is you get so many people coming to see it. It's as popular now as ever has been. You know, that's all you can ask for as a performer, to connect with an audience. And I love being different characters.
I can imagine. And I mean, a character like this is a gift, isn't it? Because you can just go for it, can't you? I mean, have you been able to bring an element of Ridian and what you wanted to do with it to the character, or is it very much the direction of the director?
No. The director's open to ideas. I've sort of included a few things that I suggested in the rehearsal period, and the director said, yes, that's great, keep that in. But yeah, I mean, I'm playing as essentially a muscly big baby, so my girlfriend will say that's probably, to the time. That's me.
We'll get her in later for a comment on that.
But no, the company is one of the best I've ever worked with. You hear people say this all the time, but I not only the cast, but the company manager, the director. We work with Richard O'Brien as well, the writer. He's great. So it's like a family, and I'm very grateful that they've embraced me again. Coming back yesterday for the Cardiff stint. You know, when they've had another Rocky for a few months, you'd think, oh, there'd be a few cliques, but they're not. They were so welcoming. After Cardiff, I have 3 or 4 weeks off, and then I'm doing Bristol, and then I do Hull with Rocky Horror, and then I finish.
How easy is that to do, though? I mean, if you're having that time off in between, because okay, you're going to keep it fresh. You're going to come back to each performance, but probably that little bit fresher. But in terms of, just the basics, memorising the words, memorising the movements, being able to slot back into the cast again. I mean, how easy or difficult is that?
It's fine. You've just got to be professional about it. You don't have much rehearsal time. I had about 40 minutes to recap with the assistant director and the choreographer. But it's up to me, the actor, to do the work beforehand, like your homework, really. And I quite enjoy that, though, and that's what I like about theatre, is the routine. And it's an engine that functions so well night after night. You think they do 8 shows a week, every single week. We do 2 shows on Friday, 2 shows on Saturday. You've got to be professional.
Don't you ever get bored, though, with that? I mean, if you're doing that many shows in a week, do you never get to the stage where you think, I'm sorry, I'm not up for it tonight?
I don't, personally. I enjoy. I love getting out there. I mean, I've spoken to some performers about it, like Frank Furter, it's a huge role, and he's been doing it night after night. And he's told me he doesn't get bored. He's really enjoying it. But it's tiring. You've got to take care of yourself. You can't go out every night on the beer. You can't. You've just got to look after your voice and your body for the dancers. But that's part of the fun. I come from a sporting background. I used to play a lot of rugby, and I miss that team element. So for me, being in a cast like this is like sport. Yeah.
Being part of an ensemble,
Yeah,
I can
exactly.
imagine it's an awful lot of fun. I mean, talking about keeping yourself in shape, and you obviously do, but you had a birthday milestone this year, is that right? 30
Don't
years?
mention that.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. 30
Yeah.
years young. You're 30 years young.
30. I feel ready for 30. I feel 30, yeah.
And have you learned lessons in your 20s that you're carrying into your 30s as far as
Course.
professionals?
I think the 20s are all about learning the lessons. You think you know it all at 18, 19, but little do you know, 20s is finding yourself. And of course, a lot happened for me in my 20s, and I've learned a lot about the profession in a short period of time, a lot about myself, and I'm enjoying being 30.
I mean, looking back on the last few years, because it's been a bit of a roller coaster for you, hasn't it? I mean, it's extraordinary. I don't suppose too many people remember the other artists that were with you in that particular year in X Factor, but everybody remembers Ridian. During that time, the learning curve that you've been on, which must have been enormous. I mean, with the benefit of hindsight now, would you have done any of it differently, or is it been exactly what you anticipated and wanted? I mean, lessons learned from it?
Oh, yeah, you certainly learn lessons. Yeah. Would I have done it differently? Maybe slightly. I still would have gone for the show, certainly. And I think I did it at the right time in the heyday of X Factor. It's the 10th year now. It's perhaps going on a little long. I don't know. But I was in the 4th series. But you're not expected at that age to know everything about where you go. Well, we don't know where we're going, You can't plan that. But all things considered, I'm pretty delighted with the way it's worked out.
And do you stay in contact with anybody like Simon Cowell? I mean, is he does he work as a bit of a mentor with you or anything?
Once a year, I get in touch with Simon for Christmas.
Yeah?
And he always replies.
Yeah?
Yeah, so I speak to Louis Walsh. Danny Minogue, she was my mentor, and I often text her and we tweet and stuff. So, yeah, it's all really amicable.
Does she keep tabs on what you're doing? I mean, or do you keep her up to date with what you're doing?
Yes, she's the great one for that. She's on the social media. She's brilliant. And she sees what I'm doing. And she saw pictures of the Rocky Horror Show. She got in touch, said, send pictures to me. Oh, I'm going to make a thing about this. And she did love her, all the way from Australia.
That's good, because a lot of people would say, unfortunately, with those sort of shows, they're moving on then to the next year, next batch of artists. There is that danger that a lot of people will fall by the wayside. But the fact that they do genuinely keep in contact, I think a lot of people will be reassured by that, perhaps.
Well, yeah, absolutely. They do. My mentor cared anyway. But you can't rely on an X Factor mentor to, she's doing her own career. You've got to have the wherewithal to grow your own career, and I've got a good team around me now. I've got new management, Neil O'Brien Entertainment. He's fantastic. As I said, we're recording a new album, my 5th album, which is released next year.
Can you believe you're talking about your 5th album? I mean, I know it's been a few years since X Factor now, but I mean,